The Poor Miller's Boy and the Cat, a fairy tale by the brothers Grimm. In a certain mill lived an old miller who had neither wife nor child, and 3 apprentices served under him. As they had been with him for several years, he one day said to them, "I am old and want to sit in the chimney corner. Go out, and whichever of you brings me the best horse, to him I will give the mill. In return, he shall take care of me till my death." The third of the boys, however, was the drudge, who was considered foolish by the others. They begrudged him the mill, and afterwards he would not even want it. All 3 went out together, and when they came to the village, the 2 said to stupid Hans, "You might as well stay here. You will never get a horse as long as you live." Hans, however, went with them, and when it was night, they came to a cave in which they lay down to sleep. The 2 clever ones waited until Hans had fallen asleep, then they got up and went away, leaving him behind. They thought they had done a very clever thing, but it was certain to turn out poorly for them. When the sun rose and Hans woke up, he was lying in a deep cavern. He looked around on every side and exclaimed, "Oh, heavens, where am I?" Then he got up, clambered out of the cave, went into the forest, and thought, "Here I am, quite alone and deserted. How shall I obtain a horse now?" While he was walking, lost in thought, he met a small tabby cat that said quite kindly, "Hans, where are you going?" "Alas, you cannot help me." "I well know your desire," said the cat. "You wish to have a beautiful horse. Come with me and be my faithful servant for 7 years, and then I will give you one more beautiful than any you have ever seen in your whole life." "Well, this is a wonderful cat," thought Hans, "but I am determined to see if she is telling the truth." So she took him with her into her enchanted castle, where there were nothing but cats who were her servants. They leapt nimbly upstairs and downstairs and were merry and happy. In the evening, when they sat down to dinner, 3 of them had to make music. One played the bassoon, the other the fiddle, and the third put the trumpet to his lips and blew out his cheeks as much as he possibly could. When they had dined, the table was carried away, and the cat said, "Now, Hans, come and dance with me." "No," said he, "I won't dance with a pussy cat. I have never done that yet." "Then take him to bed," she said to the cats. So one of them lighted him to his bedroom. One pulled his shoes off, one his stockings, and at last one of them blew out the candle. The next morning they returned and helped him out of bed. One put his stockings on for him, one tied his garters, one brought his shoes, one washed him, and one dried his face with her tail. "That feels very soft," said Hans. He had to serve the cat and chop some wood every day. To do that, he had an axe of silver, a wedge and saw of silver, and a mallet of copper. So he chopped the wood small, stayed in the house, and had good meat and drink, but never saw anyone except the tabby cat and her servants. Once she said to him, "Go and mow my meadow and dry the grass," and gave him a scythe of silver and a whetstone of gold, but bade him deliver them up again carefully. So Hans went and did what he was bidden. When he had finished the work, he carried the scythe, whetstone, and hay to the house, and asked if it was not yet time for her to give him his reward. "No," said the cat, "you must first do something more for me of the same kind. There is timber of silver, a carpenter's axe, a square, and everything that is needed, all of silver. With these, build me a small house." Then Hans built the small house and said that he had now done everything, but he still had no horse. Nevertheless, the 7 years had gone by as if they were 6 months. The cat asked him if he would like to see her horses. "Yes," said Hans. She opened the door of the small house, and there stood 12 horses, so bright and shining that his heart rejoiced at the sight of them. Now she gave him food and drink and said, "Go home. I will not give you your horse right now, but in 3 days' time I will follow you and bring it." So Hans set out, and she showed him the way to the mill. However, she had never given him a new coat, and he had been obliged to keep on his dirty old smock frock, which he had brought with him, and which had become too small for him over the 7 years. When he reached home, the 2 other apprentices were there again as well, and each had brought a horse with him. However, one horse was blind, and the other was lame. They asked Hans where his horse was. "It will follow me in 3 days' time," he replied. They laughed and said, "Indeed, stupid Hans, where will you get a horse?" "It will be a fine one." Hans went into the parlor, but the miller said he should not sit down at the table. because he was so ragged and torn that they would all be ashamed of him if anyone came in. So they gave him a mouthful of food outside. At night, when they went to rest, the two others would not let him have a bed, and at last he was forced to creep into the goose house and lie down on a little hard straw. In the morning, when he awoke, the 3 days had passed. A coach came with 6 horses, and they shone so brightly that it was delightful to see them. A servant brought a 7th horse as well, which was for the poor miller's boy. A magnificent princess alighted from the coach and went into the mill, and this princess was the little tabby cat whom poor Hans had served for 7 years. She asked the miller where the miller's boy and drudge was. The miller said, "We cannot have him here in the mill, for he is so ragged. He is lying in the goose house." The king's daughter said they were to bring him immediately. They brought him out, and he had to hold his little smock frock together to cover himself. The servants unpacked splendid garments, washed him, and dressed him, and when that was done, no king could have looked more handsome. The maiden then desired to see the horses that the other apprentices had brought home. One of the horses was blind, and the other was lame. She ordered the servant to bring the 7th horse, and when the miller saw it, he said that such a horse had never yet entered his yard. "And that is for the 3rd miller's boy," she said. "Then he must have the mill," said the miller. However, the king's daughter said that the horse was there, and that he was to keep his mill as well. She took her faithful Hans, set him in the coach, and drove away with him. They first drove to the little house he had built with the silver tools, and behold, it was a great castle, and everything inside it was of silver and gold. Then she married him, and he was rich, so rich that he had enough for all the rest of his life. After this, let no one ever say that anyone who is silly can never become a person of importance. The Two Travelers, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Hill and vale do not come together, but the children of men do, both good and bad. In this way, a shoemaker and a tailor once met each other during their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow who was always merry and full of enjoyment. When he saw the shoemaker approaching from the other side, he noticed the shoemaker's bag and guessed his trade. The tailor then sang a little mocking song: "Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over with pitch, knock the nail on the head." The shoemaker, however, could not endure a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. The little fellow began to laugh, reached him his bottle, and said, "No harm was meant. Take a drink and swallow your anger down." The shoemaker took a hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor and said, "I spoke civilly to you. One speaks well after much drinking, but not after much thirst. Shall we travel together?" "All right," answered the tailor, "if it suits you to go into a big town where there is no lack of work." "That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small nest there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." So they traveled onwards together, always setting one foot before the other like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached a town, they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen, because the tailor looked so lively and merry, with such pretty red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly. When luck was good, the master's daughters even gave him a kiss beneath the porch. When he again met with the shoemaker, the tailor always had the most in his bundle. The ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor would laugh, sing, and share all he had with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer and thumped the table in his joy until the glasses danced. For him, it was lightly come, lightly go. After traveling for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths led through it. One was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2. However, neither of the travelers knew which was the shorter way. They sat beneath an oak tree and took counsel on how they should proceed, and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take bread for a week." "What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about? I shall trust in God and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as in winter, but in hot weather, bread gets dry and moldy. Even my coat does not go as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days is enough." Each bought his own bread, and then they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet there as in a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches, no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The heavy bread weighed down his back until the perspiration streamed down his cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on a leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days. On the third day, however, the forest still would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all his bread. After all, his heart sank down a yard deeper. Despite this, he did not lose courage, but relied on God and his luck. On the third day, he lay down hungry under a tree in the evening and rose again the next morning, still hungry. The fourth day passed in the same manner. When the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a looker-on. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "You have always been so merry, now you can try what it is to be sad. The birds that sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening." In short, he was pitiless. On the fifth morning, the poor tailor could no longer stand up and was hardly able to utter a word from weakness. His cheeks were white, and his eyes red. The shoemaker then said to him, "I will give you a bit of bread today, but in return, I will put out your right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, could not do otherwise. He wept once more with both eyes, and then held them out. The shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor recalled what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry: "Eat what one can, and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. On the sixth day, however, hunger gnawed him almost to the heart. In the evening, he fell down by a tree, and on the seventh morning he could not raise himself up from faintness, with death close at hand. The shoemaker said, "I will show mercy and give you bread once more, but you shall not have it for nothing. I shall put out your other eye for it." The tailor then felt how thoughtless his life had been. He prayed to God for forgiveness and said, "Do what you will, I will bear what I must. But remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed you have done to me, which I have not deserved, will be repaid. When times were good for me, I shared what I had with you. My trade requires that each stitch must always be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes and can sew no more, I must go begging. At any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger." The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. There, the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and then left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When day dawned, he awoke but knew not where he lay. Two poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and a crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak and said, "Brother, are you awake?" "Yes, I am awake," answered the second. "Then I will tell you something," said the first. "The dew that has fallen on us this night from the gallows gives everyone who washes with it their eyes again. If blind people knew this, how many would regain their sight who do not believe it to be possible?" Upon hearing this, the tailor took his pocket handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately, what the man on the gallows had said came true, and a pair of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. Soon after, the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains. In the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds flying past, and the midges dancing in the air. Taking a needle from his pocket, he threaded it as well as he ever had, and his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy shown to him, and said his morning prayer. He also did not forget to pray for the poor sinners hanging there, swinging against each other in the wind like pendulums of clocks. Then he took his bundle on his back and soon forgot the pain he had endured, singing and whistling as he went on his way. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane, intending to ride it into the town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. "I am still too young," it said. "Even a light tailor such as you would break my back in two. Let me go until I have grown strong. A time may come when I may reward you for it." "Run off," said the tailor. "I see you are still a giddy thing." He gave it a touch with a switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away into the open country. Meanwhile, the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before. "The sun, to be sure, fills my eyes," said he, "but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes across me, and is even half edible, will have to suffer for it." At this moment, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him. "Halt, halt!" cried the tailor, seizing it by the leg. "I don't know if you are good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut your head off and roast you." "Don't do that," replied the stork. "I am a sacred bird that brings mankind great profit, and no one does me harm. Leave me my life, and I may do you good in some other way." "Well, be off, cousin Longlegs," said the tailor. The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away. "What will become of me?" said the tailor to himself at last. "My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach emptier. Whatever comes my way now is lost." At that moment he saw a couple of young ducks swimming towards him on a pond. "You come just at the right moment," said he, grabbing one of them and preparing to wring its neck. An old duck, hidden among the reeds, began to scream loudly, swimming towards him with an open beak, and urgently begged him to spare her dear children. "Can you not imagine," said she, "how your mother would mourn if someone wanted to carry you off and give you your finishing stroke?" "Only be quiet," said the good-tempered tailor. "You shall keep your children," and he put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned around, he found himself in front of an old tree, partly hollow, and saw some wild bees flying in and out of it. "There I shall at once find the reward of my good deed," said the tailor. "The honey will refresh me." But the queen bee came out, threatened him, and said, "If you touch my people and destroy my nest, our stings shall pierce your skin like 10,000 red-hot needles. If you leave us in peace and go your way, we will do you a service for it another time." The little tailor saw that nothing could be done here either. 3 empty dishes and nothing on the fourth is a bad dinner. Therefore, he dragged himself with his starved-out stomach into the town. As it was just striking 12, all was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said, "Now I will get to work." He went around the town, sought a master, and soon found a good situation. Since he had thoroughly learned his trade, it was not long before he became famous, and everyone wanted to have their new coat made by the little tailor, whose importance increased daily. "I can go no further in skill," he said, "and yet things improve every day." At last, the king appointed him court tailor. How things do happen in the world! On the very same day, his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. "Before he takes revenge on me," he thought to himself, "I must dig a pit for him." However, he who digs a pit for another falls into it himself. In the evening, when work was over and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow, and has boasted that he will retrieve the gold crown that was lost in ancient times." "That would please me very much," said the king, and he had the tailor brought before him the next morning. He ordered the tailor to get the crown back again or leave the town forever. "Oh ho!" thought the tailor. "A rogue gives more than he has got. If the surly king wants me to do what no one else can, I will not wait until morning, but will leave the town at once, today." He packed up his bundle, but when he was outside the gate, he could not help feeling sorry to give up his good fortune and turn his back on the town where everything had gone so well for him. He came to the pond where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks. At that very moment, the old duck whose young ones he had spared was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She instantly recognized him and asked why he was hanging his head so low. "You will not be surprised when you hear what has befallen me," replied the tailor, and he told her his fate. "If that is all," said the duck, "we can help you. The crown fell into the water and lies at the bottom. We will soon bring it up for you. In the meantime, just spread out your handkerchief on the bank." She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again, sitting with the crown resting on her wings. The 12 young ones were swimming around, their beaks under it, helping to carry it. They swam to the shore and placed the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent the crown was. When the sun shone on it, it gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together by the four corners and carried it to the king, who was full of joy and put a gold chain around the tailor's neck. Seeing that one stroke had failed, the shoemaker contrived a second plan. He went to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy and wax the entire royal palace with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out." The king sent for the tailor and ordered him to copy and wax the entire royal palace with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. If he did not succeed in doing this, or if so much as one nail on the wall were missing, he would be imprisoned for life underground. The tailor thought, "It gets worse and worse. No one can endure this?" He threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck, since he held his head so awry. "Alas, no," answered the tailor. "Something quite different weighs me down." And he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hum amongst themselves, and the queen bee said, "Just go home again, but come back tomorrow at this time and bring a large sheet with you, and then all will be well." So he turned back again, while the bees flew to the royal palace, entered through the open windows, and inspected every corner meticulously. Then they hurried back and modeled the palace in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on would have thought it was growing before their eyes. By the evening, everything was ready. When the tailor came the next morning, the entire splendid building was there, not one nail or tile missing. It was delicate, white as snow, and smelled sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough. He placed it in his largest hall, and in return presented the tailor with a large stone house. However, the shoemaker did not give up. He went for the third time to the king and said, "Lord King, it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in the courtyard of the castle, and he has boasted that it shall rise up in the midst of the courtyard to a man's height and be clear as crystal." The king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said, "If a stream of water does not rise in my courtyard by tomorrow as thou hast promised, the executioner shall in that very place make thee shorter by the head." The poor tailor did not take long to think about it. He hurried out to the gate, and because this time it was a matter of life and death, tears rolled down his face. As he was going forth full of sorrow, the foal he had formerly set free, now a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him. "The time has come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay thee for thy good deed. I know already what is needful to thee, but thou shalt soon have help. Get on me, my back can carry two such as thou." The tailor's courage returned. He jumped up in one bound, and the horse went full speed into the town, right up to the courtyard of the castle. It galloped as quick as lightning thrice around it, and on the third time it fell violently down. At that instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of earth in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air, and directly after, A jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback. The water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw that, he arose in amazement and embraced the tailor in sight of all. Yet good fortune did not last long. The king had many daughters, each prettier than the other, but no son. The malicious shoemaker went for the fourth time to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He now boasts that if he liked, he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air." The king summoned the tailor and said, "If thou causest a son to be brought to me within 9 days, thou shalt have my eldest daughter to wife." "The reward is indeed great," thought the little tailor. "One would willingly do something for it, but the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me, and I shall fall." He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought over what was to be done. "It can't be managed," he cried at last. "I will go away. After all, I can't live in peace here." He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he reached the meadow, he perceived his old friend the stork, who was walking back and forth like a philosopher. Sometimes the stork stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him. "I see," he began, "that thou hast thy pack on thy back. Why art thou leaving the town?" The tailor told him what the king had required of him, how he could not perform it, and lamented his misfortune. "Don't let thy hair grow gray about that," said the stork. "I will help thee out of thy difficulty. For a long time now, I have carried the children in swaddling clothes into the town, so for once in a way I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time, repair to the royal palace, and there will I come." The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in, walking with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had, moreover, a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hands to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed and kissed it, beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off his back and handed it over to the queen. In it were little paper parcels with colored sweetmeats, which were divided amongst the little princesses. The eldest, however, received none of them, but got the merry tailor for a husband. "It seems to me," said he, "just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was right after all. She always said that whoever trusts in God and has good luck can never fail." The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding festival, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down. When he had closed his eyes and was about to sleep, 2 crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there and pecked his eyes out. In his madness, he ran into the forest and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever seen him again or heard of him. Hans, my Hedgehog. A fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a countryman who had money and land in plenty. However, despite his wealth, one thing was still missing in his happiness. He had no children. Often, when he went into the town with the other peasants, they mocked him and asked why he had no children. At last, he became angry, and when he got home, he said, "I will have a child, even if it is a hedgehog." Then his wife had a child who was a hedgehog in the upper part of his body and a boy in the lower. When she saw the child, she was terrified and said, "See, there, you have brought ill luck on us." The man replied, "What can be done now? The boy must be christened, but we shall not be able to get a godfather for him." The woman said, "We cannot call him anything else but Hans my Hedgehog." When he was christened, the parson said, "He cannot go into any ordinary bed because of his spikes." So a little straw was put behind the stove, and Hans my Hedgehog was laid on it. His mother could not suckle him, for he would have pricked her with his quills. Thus he lay there behind the stove for 8 years, and his father was tired of him and thought, if only he would die. However, he did not die, but remained lying there. Now it happened that there was a fair in the town, and the peasant was about to go to it. He asked his wife what he should bring back with him for her. "A little meat and a couple of white rolls, which are needed for the house," said she. Then he asked the servant, and she wanted a pair of slippers and some stockings with clocks. At last he also said, "What do you want, Hans, my hedgehog?" "Dear father," he said, "do bring me bagpipes." When the father came home again, he gave his wife what he had bought for her, meat and white rolls. Then he gave the maid the slippers and the stockings with clocks. Finally, he went behind the stove and gave Hans my hedgehog the bagpipes. When Hans my hedgehog had the bagpipes, he said, "Dear father, please go to the forge and get the cock shod, and then I will ride away and never come back again." Upon hearing this, the father was delighted to think that he was going to get rid of him. He had the cock shod for him, and when it was done, Hans my hedgehog got on it and rode away, taking swine and asses with him, which he intended to keep in the forest. When they got there, he made the cock fly onto a high tree with him, and there he sat for many a long year, watching his asses and swine until the herd was quite large. His father knew nothing about him. While he was sitting in the tree, he played his bagpipes and made very beautiful music. Once a king came traveling by who had lost his way and heard the music. He was astonished by it and sent his servant forth to look all around and see from whence this music came. The servant spied about, but saw nothing but a little animal sitting up aloft on the tree, which looked like a cock with a hedgehog on it, making this music. Then the king told the servant to ask why he sat there and if he knew the road that led to his kingdom. Hans my hedgehog descended from the tree and said he would show the way if the king would write a bond and promise him whatever he first met in the royal courtyard as soon as he arrived home. The king thought, "I can easily do that. Hans my hedgehog understands nothing, and I can write what I like." So the king took pen and ink and wrote something. When he had done it, Hans my hedgehog showed him the way, and he got safely home. His daughter, when she saw him from afar, was so overjoyed that she ran to meet him and kissed him. Then he remembered Hans my hedgehog and told her what had happened, explaining that he had been forced to promise whatever first met him when he got home to a very strange animal that sat on a cock as if it were a horse and made beautiful music. However, instead of writing that he should have what he wanted, he had written that he should not have it. Upon hearing this, the princess was glad and said he had done well, for she never would have gone away with the hedgehog. Meanwhile, Hans my hedgehog looked after his asses and pigs, always merry as he sat on the tree and played his bagpipes. It came to pass that another king journeyed by with his attendants and runners, and he too lost his way, unable to find his way home again because the forest was so large. He also heard the beautiful music from a distance and asked his runner what it could be, instructing him to go and see. The runner went under the tree and saw the cock sitting at the top with Hans my hedgehog on the cock. The runner asked him what he was doing up there. "I am keeping my asses and my pigs. What is your desire?" Hans my hedgehog replied. The messenger explained that they had lost their way and could not get back to their own kingdom, asking if he would show them the way. Hans my hedgehog then got down from the tree with the cock and told the aged king that he would show him the way if he promised to give him whatever first met him in front of his royal palace. The king agreed and wrote a promise to Hans my hedgehog that he would have this. With that done, Hans rode on before him on the cock, pointed out the way, and the king reached his kingdom safely. When the king arrived at the courtyard, there were great rejoicings. He had an only daughter who was very beautiful. She ran to meet him, threw her arms around his neck, and was delighted to have her father back again. She asked him where in the world he had been so long. He told her how he had lost his way and had nearly not come back at all. He recounted how, as he was traveling through a great forest, a creature, half hedgehog, half man, who was sitting astride a cock in a high tree and making music, had shown him the way and helped him get out. However, in return, he had promised the creature whatever first met him in the royal courtyard, and that happened to be her, which made him unhappy now. She promised that, for the love of her father, she would willingly go with Hans if he came. Hans my hedgehog, however, continued to take care of his pigs, and they multiplied until they filled the whole forest. Then Hans my hedgehog resolved not to live in the forest any longer, and sent word to his father to have every sty in the village emptied, for he was coming with such a great herd that all might kill who wished to do so. When his father heard that, he was troubled, for he thought Hans my Hedgehog had died long ago. Hans my Hedgehog, however, seated himself on the cock and drove the pigs before him into the village, ordering the slaughter to begin. Ha! There was a killing and chopping that might have been heard 2 miles off. After this, Hans my Hedgehog said, "Father, let me have the cock shod once more at the forge, and then I will ride away and never come back as long as I live." The father had the cock shod once more, and was pleased that Hans my Hedgehog would never return again. Hans my Hedgehog rode away to the first kingdom. The king had commanded that anyone arriving on a cock with bagpipes should be shot at, cut down, or stabbed by everyone to prevent entry into the palace. Thus, when Hans my Hedgehog arrived, they all pressed forward against him with their pikes. He spurred the cock, and it flew up over the gate in front of the king's window and landed there. Hans cried out that the king must give him what he had promised, or he would take both his life and his daughter's. The king then began to speak kindly to his daughter, begging her to go away with Hans to save their lives. She dressed in white, and her father provided a carriage with 6 horses, magnificent attendants, gold, and possessions. She seated herself in the carriage, placing Hans my Hedgehog beside her with the cock and the bagpipes. They took their leave and drove away, and the king thought he would never see her again. However, when they were a short distance from the town, Hans my Hedgehog took her fine clothes off and pierced her with his hedgehog skin until she bled all over. "That is the reward of your falseness," he said. "Go your way, I will not have you." He then chased her home, and she was disgraced for the rest of her life. Hans my Hedgehog rode further on the cock with his bagpipes to the dominions of the second king to whom he had shown the way. This king had arranged that if anyone resembling Hans my Hedgehog should come, they were to present arms, give him safe conduct, cry long life to him, and lead him to the royal palace. When the king's daughter saw him, she was terrified, for he looked quite strange. She remembered, however, that she could not change her mind, for she had given her promise to her father. Hans my Hedgehog was welcomed by her, married her, and had to go with her to the royal table, where they ate and drank. When evening came and they wanted to sleep, she was afraid of his quills. He reassured her, saying she had nothing to fear, for no harm would befall her. He told the old king to appoint 4 men to watch by the chamber door and light a great fire. When he entered the room and was about to get into bed, he would creep out of his hedgehog skin and leave it lying by the bedside. The men were to run quickly, throw it in the fire, and stay until it was consumed. When the clock struck 11, he went into the chamber, stripped off the hedgehog's skin, and left it by the bed. The men swiftly fetched it, threw it in the fire, and watched until it was consumed. He was then delivered and lay in bed in human form, though coal-black as if burnt. The king sent for his physician, who washed him with precious salves and anointed him, and he became a handsome young man. When the king's daughter saw this, she was glad. The next morning they arose joyfully, ate and drank, and then the marriage was properly solemnized. Hans my Hedgehog received the kingdom from the aged king. After several years, he went with his wife to his father and revealed that he was his son. The father, however, declared he had no son. He had had only one, born like a hedgehog with spikes, who had gone forth into the world. Hans then made himself known, and the old father rejoiced and went with him to his kingdom. The Shroud by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a mother who had a little boy of 7 years old, who was so handsome and lovable that no one could look at him without liking him. She herself worshipped him above everything in the world. It so happened that he suddenly became ill, and God took him to himself. The mother could not be comforted and wept both day and night. Soon afterwards, when the child had been buried, he appeared by night in the places where he had sat and played during his life. If the mother wept, he wept also, and when morning came, he disappeared. Since the mother would not stop crying, he came one night in the little white shroud in which he had been laid in his coffin, with a wreath of flowers around his head. He stood at the foot of her bed and said, "Oh, mother, do stop crying, or I shall never fall asleep in my coffin. My shroud will not dry because of all your tears that fall upon it." The mother was afraid when she heard that, and wept no more. The next night, the child came again, holding a little light in his hand, and said, "Look, mother, my shroud is nearly dry, and I can rest in my grave." Then the mother gave her sorrow into God's keeping and bore it quietly and patiently. The child came no more, but slept in his little bed beneath the earth. The Jew Among Thorns, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a rich man who had a servant who served him diligently and honestly. He was every morning the first out of bed and the last to go to rest at night. Whenever there was a difficult job to be done, which nobody cared to undertake, he was always the first to set himself to it. Moreover, he never complained, but was contented with everything and always merry. When a year had ended, his master gave him no wages, thinking to himself, "That is the cleverest way, for I shall save something, and he will not go away, but stay quietly in my service." The servant said nothing, but did his work the second year as he had done it the first. When at the end of this, likewise, he received no wages, he made himself happy and still stayed on. When the third year also had passed, the master considered, put his hand in his pocket, but pulled nothing out. Then at last the servant said, "Master, for 3 years I have served you honestly. Be so good as to give me what I ought to have, for I wish to leave and look about me a little more in the world." "Yes, my good fellow," answered the old miser, "you have served me industriously, and therefore you shall be cheerfully rewarded." He put his hand into his pocket, but counted out only 3 farthings, saying, "There, you have a farthing for each year. That is large and liberal pay, such as you would have received from few masters." The honest servant, who understood little about money, put his fortune into his pocket and thought, "Ah, now that I have my purse full, why need I trouble and plague myself any longer with hard work?" So on he went, up hill and down dale, singing and jumping to his heart's content. It came to pass that as he was going by a thicket, a little man stepped out and called to him, "Whither away, merry brother? I see you do not carry many cares." "Why should I be sad?" answered the servant. "I have enough. 3 years' wages are jingling in my pocket." "How much is your treasure?" the dwarf asked him. "How much? 3 farthings sterling, all told." "Look here," said the dwarf. "I am a poor needy man. Give me your 3 farthings. I can work no longer, but you are young and can easily earn your bread." As the servant had a good heart and felt pity for the old man, he gave him the 3 farthings, saying, "Take them in the name of heaven. I shall not be any the worse for it." Then the little man said, "As I see you have a good heart, I grant you 3 wishes, one for each farthing. They shall all be fulfilled." "Aha!" said the servant. "You are one of those who can work wonders. Well then, if it is to be so, I wish first for a gun, which shall hit everything that I aim at. Secondly, for a fiddle, which when I play on it, shall compel all who hear it to dance. Thirdly, that if I ask a favor of anyone, they shall not be able to refuse it." "All that shall you have," said the dwarf, and put his hand into the bush. "Only think, there lay a fiddle and gun, all ready, just as if they had been ordered. These he gave to the servant, and then said to him, 'Whatever you may ask at any time, no man in the world shall be able to deny you.' Heart alive, what can one desire more?" said the servant to himself, and went merrily onwards. Soon afterwards he met a Jew with a long goat's beard, who was standing listening to the song of a bird which was sitting up at the top of a tree. "Good heavens," he was exclaiming, "that such a small creature should have such a fearfully loud voice. If it were but mine, if only someone would sprinkle some salt upon its tail." "If that is all," said the servant, "the bird shall soon be down here." Taking aim, he pulled the trigger, and down fell the bird into the thorn bushes. "Go, you rogue," he said to the Jew, "and fetch the bird out for yourself." "Oh," said the Jew, "leave out the rogue, my master, and I will do it at once. I will get the bird out for myself, as you really have hit it." Then he lay down on the ground and began to crawl into the thicket. When he was fast among the thorns, the good servant's humor tempted him, so he took up his fiddle and began to play. In a moment, the Jew's legs began to move and jump into the air, and the more the servant fiddled, the better the dance went. The thorns tore his shabby coat, combed his beard, and pricked and plucked him all over his body. "Oh dear," cried the Jew, "what do I want with your fiddling?" "Leave the fiddle alone, master. I do not want to dance." The servant did not listen to him and thought, "You have fleeced people often enough. Now the thorn bushes shall do the same to you." He began to play again, causing the Jew to jump higher than ever, leaving scraps of his coat hanging on the thorns. "Oh, woe's me," cried the Jew. "I will give the gentleman whatever he asks if only he stops fiddling, a purse full of gold." "If you are so generous," said the servant, "I will stop my music, but I must say to your credit that you dance to it so well that it is quite an art." Having taken the purse, he went his way. The Jew stood still and watched the servant quietly until he was far off and out of sight. Then he screamed out with all his might, "You miserable musician! You beerhouse fiddler! Wait till I catch you alone. I will hunt you until the soles of your shoes fall off. You ragamuffin! Just put 5 farthings in your mouth, and then you may be worth 3 halfpence." He continued abusing him as fast as he could speak. As soon as he had refreshed himself a little in this way and caught his breath again, he ran into the town to the justice. "My lord judge," he said, "I have come to make a complaint. See how a rascal has robbed and ill-treated me on the public highway. A stone on the ground might pity me. My clothes are all torn, my body pricked and scratched, my little all gone with my purse. Good ducats, each piece better than the last. For God's sake, let the man be thrown into prison." "Was it a soldier," asked the judge, "who cut you thus with his saber?" "Nothing of the sort," said the Jew. "It was no sword that he had, but a gun hanging at his back and a fiddle at his neck. The wretch may easily be known." So the judge sent his people out after the man, and they found the good servant, who had been going quite slowly along, and they found, too, the purse with the money upon him. As soon as he was taken before the judge, he said, "I did not touch the Jew, nor take his money. He gave it to me of his own free will, so I would stop fiddling because he could not bear my music." "Heaven defend us," cried the Jew. "His lies are as thick as flies upon the wall." The judge did not believe the servant's tale and said, "This is a bad defense. No Jew would do that." Because he had committed robbery on the public highway, the judge sentenced the good servant to be hanged. As he was being led away, the Jew again screamed after him, "You vagabond! You dog of a fiddler! Now you are going to receive your well-earned reward." The servant walked quietly with the hangman up the ladder, but upon the last step, he turned around and said to the judge, "Grant me just one request before I die." "Yes, if you do not ask for your life," said the judge. "I do not ask for life," answered the servant, "but as a last favor, let me play once more upon my fiddle." The Jew raised a great cry of, "Murder, murder! For goodness' sake, do not allow it! Do not allow it!" However, the judge said, "Why should I not let him have this short pleasure? It has been granted to him, and he shall have it." Besides, he could not have refused on account of the gift bestowed on the servant. The Jew then cried, "Oh, woe's me! Tie me fast!" Meanwhile, the good servant took his fiddle from his neck and made ready. As he gave the first scrape, everyone began to quiver and shake, the judge, his clerk, the hangman, and his men. The cord fell out of the hand of the one who was going to tie the Jew fast. At the second scrape, they all raised their legs, and the hangman let go of the good servant, making himself ready to dance. At the third scrape, they all leaped up and began to dance, with the judge and the Jew being the best at jumping. Soon, all who had gathered in the marketplace out of curiosity were dancing with them. Old and young, fat and lean, all together. The dogs, which had run there, also got up on their hind legs and capered about. The longer he played, the higher the dancers sprang, knocking against each other's heads and shrieking terribly. At length, the judge, quite out of breath, cried, "I will give you your life if you will only stop fiddling." The good servant, having compassion, took his fiddle and hung it around his neck again, then stepped down the ladder. He went up to the Jew, who was lying on the ground panting for breath, and said, "You rascal, now confess where you got the money, or I will take my fiddle and begin to play again." I stole it," cried the Jew, "but you have honestly earned it." So the judge had the Jew taken to the gallows and hanged as a thief.